Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Experimental Cataclysm, the show where we talk about recent changes to the experimental version of Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. Blah blah blah, lots of stuff to talk about this week, so let's just get started. First up from Sadinar, we've got more nesting for recipes. Now, I was actually going to mention this a couple weeks ago. I had seen someone added a few new nested categories for crafting recipes. It was the first time I had seen anyone do anything with this system in quite a long time. When it was first implemented, people were adding new categories all the time, but that has gradually fallen away. And here in this PR, there are now more nested categories that were added to the game. I'm just happy to see people using this again. We still have many recipes that probably could be nested, so any movement there is appreciated, and slowly reducing clutter in the crafting menu is always a good thing, and I just wanted to shout it out. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got a change to how armor penetration works in the game. Very simply, armor penetration used to apply to every single piece of armor, but now it will be lowered per piece of gear that it has to penetrate. So if that sounds confusing, basically if an attack hits your outer layer of armor and then penetrates it, its armor penetration is then reduced when it hits your inner layer of armor, and just so on down the line through all your clothing. And to be honest, I've tried to write out examples here like 4 times, but I can't really think how to word this, so yeah, I don't really know what to say about this. Armor penetration will now be sort of consumed when it hits armor rather than applying evenly to everything that it hits. And beyond that, I don't really know how to phrase this, so yeah. Next up, also from A Noob in Disguise, we've got Ineliminable Bionics, which is a word that I do not often find myself using, but I also can't think of any other word that describes it. And basically this makes it so that certain bionics can never be removed from the player, and specifically it's the Intelligence Boosting Bionic and the Memory Bionic. The idea here being that these are completely integral to your brain once they are installed and you need them to function, and therefore removing them would result in catastrophic consequences for the player. So the example in the PR being the Memory Enhancer CBM, which is basically just a hard drive with your memories on it. In order to remove such a thing would also remove those memories, which could have potentially devastating consequences for the player and also not really be a thing that we can model in the game. So you cannot remove them now. It's really not much to say here. It's just interesting, and it could potentially be expanded to include other bionics in the future. Now obviously this does restrict player freedom a little bit here, especially if you're using the Bionics slots mod, but also I think it makes perfect sense for some bionics to not be removed. If these bionics replace certain organic parts, especially obviously in the brain, then yeah, we probably can't just rip those out. It doesn't matter how good Rubik gets at mutilating human bodies, we're probably not going to do this. So yeah, I like this. I'm sure someone will be irritated by this, and like I said, with the Bionic slots mod could cause some problems for people, but I overall like this. I think it's interesting, and it adds a layer of complexity to choosing your bionics when you know that you can never remove them in the future. Next up today from Rennick CDDA, we've got vision for initial cities when you first start a new game. So you've probably all seen this. You start up a new game and your character literally only knows what is immediately around them. Apparently they parachuted into this location wearing a blindfold because they have absolutely no idea what the surrounding landscape or roads or surrounding towns actually look like. And this is pretty dumb, so this PR makes it so that when you start a new game, you will be able to see the closest city or town. It will also show you a path to that location if it's not like immediately apparent, if it's not super close to you, so you will see a road leading there as well. Now I view this as a pretty great change. It's pretty dumb that your character had no idea where they were despite presumably traveling to that location from somewhere else. And to be clear, this does not apply to every scenario. Certain scenarios like, what is it, the one where you're like a medieval peasant or whatever, you don't get this benefit. I think the lore is like you got teleported here from the past or something. It's really dumb, probably needs to be reworked, but whatever. So anyway, starting in a town obviously means that this is not necessary. You don't need to reveal a town, and if you're on something like an island prison, and you wouldn't really know necessarily where the nearest town is. However, this is enabled by default for scenarios, so most of them will have this feature, and in the future, if something is added, unless they explicitly say don't use this feature, then you will automatically have this. Now I really like this change. I think it makes a lot of sense, and certainly it adds some roleplay elements. Now you can say, oh, I was at the evac shelter because I traveled there from a nearby town. And yeah, it just makes sense to me, like, oh, I was in this town, I lived in this town, and then things went bad, Nomad, so I had to go to the evac shelter. Here's the road I traveled to get to the shelter, and etc. It just makes sense to me. So anyway, yeah, I like this. I think it's a good change, and moving on. Next up today from Carol, we've got just a whole mess of tweaks to duct tape. Now, I remember when duct tape stuff was changed many years ago, a lot of people got super mad about it, so I don't know how people are going to react to all of this, but to me, they all seem like completely reasonable changes. So first of all, it changed the weight and volume, the price, the recipe, and at least one spawn location for the duct tape. That location being the bike store, which I don't actually know what that is. I don't think I've ever seen that location, so you all would know better than I do. And to be clear, it was removed from that location, I believe. It also added a roll, so duct tape is no longer just tape existing out there in the universe. It actually comes on a cardboard roll now, which ultimately means basically nothing for gameplay, but yeah, I like that it has a roll now. I don't know. Anyway, for the recipe changes, which I think is the thing you're probably going to care the most about, it now uses rubber cement instead of super glue. It uses cotton sheets in lieu of cotton patches and plastic sheets in lieu of plastic chunks. It will also no longer appear in a mechanics book. It will still appear in chemistry books and the DIY compendium, which I personally just think this should be auto-learned. Doesn't really make sense to me that it's locked in a chemistry book. We're not doing chemistry. We're literally, all you're doing is putting adhesive on fabric. I don't understand why that's not auto-learned. And then the main thing here is that it's just no longer a chemistry recipe overall. Or at least that's what stands out to me personally. This is now a fabrication recipe rather than chemistry, which I do think makes sense. I'm still not keen on it being a book recipe. Any idiot could figure out that duct tape is just glue and fabric. It's not exactly complicated. It really feels like this should be auto-learned at a skill level of like 1, but whatever. Anyway, yeah, duct tape change, hooray, moving on. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've got some mutation and bionic conflict resolution. So first of all, the armor bionics were not conflicting with the new mutations that were added with the crab PRs that we talked about previously. Obviously, if you have some form of a carapace, that is going to affect your ability to replace your skin with an armored bionic. Now, the other thing the PR did was add stab protection to those alloy CBMs, which is apparently something previously they just had bash, cut, and ballistic. This stab protection is also 3 points like the other armors. Additionally, in a separate PR, A Noob in Disguise removed bash protection from the subdermal carbon CBM. Now, I already find this CBM to be very questionable, but yeah, I removed the bash protection because carbon filaments are well known as a material that would, break from blunt impacts. Or at the very least, there's really no justification for it to provide bash protection. I'm not sure how you would argue in favor of that. Now, the only other thing I wanted to mention here is that someone commented on Discord that the alloy plating CBMs apparently conflict with the pale skin mutation. Now, a lot of these sort of conflicts between mutations and bionics are just sort of blanket added to things, even if they don't make sense. So in the future, we'll hopefully see that those conflicts get resolved and sorted out and do start making more sense, and this PR was one effort to continue having them make more sense, and therefore, it's good. Next up today from Ashglaw, we've got an expansion to possible spawn locations for certain scenarios. These are for the large building and up above scenarios. So for large buildings, you can now start on apartment complex, school, office tower, cathedral, or convention center rooftops. Now, all of these things are the roofs of those buildings, and some of them could be places you started previously. For the up above scenario, it's basically the same thing, adding these rooftops to that scenario as well. Now, it's always nice to see scenarios get new start locations, so yeah, it's pretty much a straightforward and positive thing. I just wanted to shout it out. Next up today from A Noob in Disguise, we've also got some tweaks for Nomad gear. This PR makes it so that rather than using lycra, it now uses denim. So all the spots between the leather used in this garment was previously lycra, which doesn't really make a lot of sense. Lycra is a pretty terrible material that you probably would not use. So now this uses denim, and honestly, as I'm looking at this here, I realize I don't really have any meaningful thoughts on this. Basically, I just wanted to shout it out, let people know, hey, it's not lycra anymore. It's denim, and cotton does have like a slightly better protection than lycra. It's not going to make a huge difference. But yeah, anyway, I just wanted to shout it out. So next up from Rewrite, we've got shadows for flying creatures. So previously, if you fought a flying enemy, they could disappear above you by moving up a Z level, and then you would have no idea where exactly they went. You know, did they go north? Did they go south? And etc. And without knowing that, you couldn't chase them down or flee from them very effectively, and blah blah blah, you get it. Well, thanks to this PR, those flying creatures should now cast a shadow on the ground beneath them, which will let you know where exactly they disappeared to. Additionally, this will also show your tile set's hostile indicator, letting you know if the creature above you is angry with you or peaceful or whatever. And that, I think, was just a great choice. I would have not thought to add this, and I think that's actually really handy. Now, the shadow and the indicator displayed will of course depend on your tile set, but apparently it even works with curses, and I didn't look at this. I'm not sure how you would do that, so that's cool that someone on curses also gets that feature. Anyway, I think this is a great change and is just a nice overall improvement to the quality of life when you find yourself facing flying enemies, so yeah, it's pretty good. Moving on, next up today from Guardian DLL, we've got an expansion of tools that can be plugged directly into power grids. Now, we discussed this in a recent episode, mentioning how a handful of electronics got the ability to plug directly into your vehicle or base power, which removed the need to have those batteries. Or rather, I think they still need batteries to function, but it doesn't drain the battery directly. It will now use the power from your vehicle or base. Now, the only issue with that PR is that it had been the initial implementation, so not a lot of tools were actually enabled to use this feature. Well, now this PR sought to address that and included a lot of items ranging all the way from like an electric kiln to a firearm repair kit to coffee makers and etc. Now, unfortunately, there's no easy way to see a complete list of things that got this functionality. Like, it's not on the HHG website or anything, so you're just going to have to look at your tools as you want to use them, but this was a pretty big expansion. Now, I am overall happy to see this expanded. I do think as this continues, the plugging in of tools will become like the new hotness that's going to be the meta, right? And a lot of things that we have that are battery powered make a lot of sense to be plugged in, at least to a home's power grid, since almost every appliance you use in your home, right, it works by you plugging it into the power grid. However, it does make sense for some things to remain using batteries, like a cordless drill, for example. Most of those come with battery packs and are not designed to be plugged directly into the power grid. However, many other things can be adapted to use this new feature, and this is really great, and I'm happy to see this being expanded. Moving along though, next up today from Balink, we've got a new skateboard vehicle. Skateboards, I mean, look, they're obviously not optimal for movement or anything like that, but they do exist. Why not add them to the game? You know, we do have rollerblades, we have roller skates, and it lets you roleplay a skater kid. And skateboards are very popular with young people, you know, which is why the most famous skateboarder is a 55-year-old man named Tony Hawk, who is definitely the embodiment of youth. But anyway, look, I don't know what I'm saying. It's a skateboard. It's exactly what you expect it to be. There's the vehicle form of this, and then you can examine it to fold it, which converts it to an item, which lets you carry it around. It's probably best to not think of this as actually folding the skateboard. This is really more about converting it into a form that can be carried by the player. Anyway, you use this the way you would use any vehicle to drive around. It uses stamina depending on your speed. I found that around 8 miles per hour led to stamina drain, while 4 miles per hour very slowly allowed me to recover stamina. I couldn't get it to move when I was starting it by riding it in the grass, but if you go from pavement to grass, you can keep moving a little bit sometimes just for like a tile or two. But anyway, these are obviously intended to be used on roads and sidewalks, or maybe even in a house, but obviously not on grass. Being attacked or grabbed while riding will also have a chance to knock you prone or simply rip you off of the skateboard. Now, as I was testing this, I continually received messages that said you're almost sent flying, but something holds you in place, which I have no idea what that means or what's causing that. I believe that having the deft trait will also make it less likely for you to fall off of your board in those situations, but actually I don't have that in front of me right now. It was deft in something else, like a skater proficiency or something. But yeah, anyway, this isn't exactly complicated. It's a skateboard. It's less optimal than pretty much any vehicle in the game, but hey, it's a new thing, and some of you nerds love this kind of stuff. Some people still wear rollerblades in the game, even though they're pretty objectively terrible. And look, someone's going to argue with me about that. Do what you will. And if you like skateboards, here you go. You got a skateboard now. Congratulations. Next up from Morvark Princess, we've got the addition of some Arabic arms and armor, as well as a book that contains those recipes. Now, I'm not really going to cover all of these. You can just check out the book list. You can look at the book on HHG or check the PR if you're interested. Mostly I just wanted to shout it out because it's new armor and swords and whatnot, and who doesn't like that stuff. Anyway, the book is called Tools of Warfare in the Arabic World, and it contains a great deal of recipes. Now, the majority of these are actually just the different sizes and steel qualities like, usually is. Again, you can check it out if you want to. But yeah, that's all I've got. I'm not super familiar with Arabic arms and armor, so yeah, I don't know. Hooray for Tool Wars, I guess. Moving along, next up today from Night, we've got a change to colds and flus. So basically, previously, for example, the game would just check if you randomly got a cold or not. It factored your health and things like that, but the checks were actually random. And some of you might remember an old Let's Play of mine where I started the game, I walked out of the shelter to walk down the road and got hit with a cold immediately. It was the earliest possible check the game made, and I had done absolutely nothing to deserve it. I literally just started the game. And don't go looking for that Let's Play. It was probably like 3 years ago. I'm sure the quality is terrible. Anyway, this obviously is not a great way to handle colds. It should not be a completely random check like that, in my opinion. So anyway, this PR made it so that when you meet random NPCs or ferals, there's a chance that they might cough on you. And if you're in close proximity with them when they cough, a check is made to see if you maybe caught their cold or flu or whatever. And a follow-up PR made it so that there would be no more random cold and flu checks, and that it will only be sourced from other human beings. Now, I don't know if there are other random sources in the game, like I don't know, maybe you could get a cold from a flaming eye attack or something weird and niche and random like that. I'm not 100% on that. But mostly, or exclusively, it will now come from random NPCs and ferals. However, this does not, as of the time of this script, apply to static NPCs. So if you're going to the refugee center, that means you're not going to get bombarded by 20 people coughing on you. Or at least that is how it is right now. I do suspect someone will change that at some point for static NPCs to be able to give you colds. Anyway, once you get the cold and you get through it, you will then receive immunity for a period of time, so you're not going to get colds back to back like you could previously. Now, this immunity is going to last for roughly 120 days, and this applies for NPCs as well, so if your buddy gets sick, he's going to be immune after that for, 120 days. Having environmental protection on your mouth will also still help you avoid getting colds in the future. So if you're wearing a gas mask and your friend coughs in your face, you're not going to get their cold. Now, people always ask about this. I don't really know why. Colds are pretty niche, and I don't know that I would prioritize wearing a mask at all times just for that situation. Now, all of that said, I have no idea how common colds are going to be among NPCs and ferals. You generally encounter way more ferals than you do random NPCs, so they seem like they would be the most likely place to get a cold in the future. However, I have noticed those random NPC people like the panicked person or feudal fighter and etc. You've probably seen them around. Now, we never did talk about their implementation because I must have just missed the PRs that added them, because I've seen them in game, but I don't remember ever seeing that change. But anyway, these cold and flu checks seem to be based on species, and it applies to all humans and ferals that are not static NPCs, so it would probably include those as random NPCs, I would expect. Now, I'm not 100% on that, but you should take precautions when approaching those characters. And yeah, I guess, if you see them coughing, then you'll know that they can, in fact, transmit those things. Anyway, overall, I think this is good. Random health checks and for diseases maybe made sense in the past, but are really not a good way to do things in the current version of the game. Making it come exclusively from NPCs makes a lot of sense, in my opinion. Now, my only concern here is how common this is actually going to be. I kind of suspect it's going to be turned way too high because, well, reasons that we don't have to go into, let's not talk about that. But I suspect that the coughing is going to be way too common, and we're just going to have to see, how that plays out as we play the game. But there you go, kids, wear your masks, keep yourself safe, which... Can we just appreciate the irony of people who in real life are anti-maskers, but then they play Cataclysm and they wear a gas mask at all times to avoid getting a cold? Can we just enjoy and lament the irony of that for a moment? And you know who you are. I know some of you are listening to this right now. You know who you are. But anyway, moving on. And then finally today from Nebness, we've got a new monster. Blah, 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 spoilers. If you don't want spoilers for a new monster, you should go away right now. And while we wait, here's some memes of xenomorphs. I don't know what to put on screen. Do you guys like the Alien franchise? It was like one of my favorites when I was a kid, and you probably do too. I mean, Xenomorphs are great, although we don't talk about the prequels. Let's not talk about the prequels. Or Alien 3, I don't know what David Fincher was thinking, but anyway. So anyway, this PR added a new gigantic frog creature similar to the Frog Mother that previously existed. Well, it still exists, I guess I shouldn't say previously existed. Now, you're probably familiar with the Frog Mother. They are, in my opinion, they're a pretty bullshit creature. Their regen is actually ridiculous, and in my opinion, it does not make sense from a realism perspective or from like a gameplay fun type standpoint. Nothing in the game should regen 10% of their HP in a single turn, in my opinion. That's actually completely broken. I think it's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm digressing, I guess. So this PR added a new variant of a big old froggy lad in the form of the Colossal Zombullfrog. It has 500 HP and, I don't know, it's pretty like mediocre armor, I guess. It can leap at you, it can pull and drag you, it can shriek to alert nearby enemies, it can give you that like temporary debuff, short shriek, stun effect thing that I don't know the name of, and it deals quite a lot of damage in melee as well. Now that said, they do only have a speed of 60, but I think that their leaping ability, they're going to be able to keep up with you completely fine. With the leap in conjunction with their ability to grab and drag you, I do think this will be frustrating because of how much it affects your movement as the player, as well as obviously the leap letting it close ground with you. So I don't want you to see 60 movement speed and think like, oh, I can just run away, because depending on terrain, you probably can't. This thing will probably keep up with you and grab you and hold you in place and cause you all kinds of problems. Now, while I do think this would be a scary creature to fight, the main comparison to be made here is to the Frog Mother, obviously. And as I said, that creature is much more OP and ridiculous, so it's hard for me to give like an unbiased assessment here. Now, the other thing that was done in this PR was to remove the fear of fire and pain from both this and the Frog Mother as well. Now, they are zombies after all, and zombies in this game, they don't fear fire and they don't feel pain the same way that a player does, so it makes sense for these to be removed. Now, I don't know that this has a huge impact on your interactions with them, but then, I don't know, maybe there was some like fire strategy that I wasn't aware of. But anyway, yeah, big froggy lad, be on the lookout, etc., etc. There are places where you would find the Frog Mother, you'll find these creatures, etc. You get it. And with that, internet, I think the video draws to a close, and actually the first shorter video in a while. I don't know if that will translate to it being released earlier than the previous videos. We'll see how that all shakes out. Now, regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for watching. I, of course, will be back in a couple of weeks with another episode, so yeah, I'll see you next time.